A very good morning, afternoon, evening to you, and very welcome to another episode of the Captains Speaking podcast, together with me, Peter Hörnfeldt, and...
Hi, everybody. Ben Watts, as always. Peter, how are you?
Oh, it's awesome to be here. I'm a little bit tired. I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit tired because there's a lot of stuff going on. But before we get into what we're going to be talking about today, which is great, we're going to talk about wind shears. We're going to talk about a little bit of medical. We're going to talk about, what else did we want to say?
We're going to go into autopilots, what they do and what they don't do.
Exactly. Bust some myths, basically. But before we say that, I just want to mention that you can listen to this podcast as well. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can listen to it on Spotify or wherever you find your favorite podcast. So having said that, how has your week been so far, Ben?
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, I finished 5 days, 5 days of flying. So it's been a busy one. Some really long days out there, thanks to delays and some of the weather that we've had recently, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, kind of going over what we'd have typical duty times, as you know, Peter. Generally, we can do 12 hours in the duty that the kind of flying that we do, from reporting to coming on stand. But one day this week, that just wasn't going to work, and we have to use something that's called captain's discretion, which no doubt you've used a few times, I would imagine.
No, absolutely. Now, this is actually a really fascinating subject to go into. We could probably do a whole podcast about duty times, but 12 hours is kind of like a ballpark figure because it depends on when you start your duty. If you do it, if you fly through the night, through the window of circadian low, you're going to have less duty time available. But I think when I started, it used to be 13 hours, and then it reduced with 30 minutes for each sector you flew above to.
That's right. I think you're right. 13 hours for 2 sectors, and then it reduces for 30 minutes per sector.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like literally, this is the funny part, is that to calculate how much duty time you actually have available becomes increasingly hard the longer you fly. And the worst it is, like if you're sitting there in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, when typically it is that you need to check whether or not you're closing in on your limits. That's when you have to do the calculations that are the hardest. So, it started at 5:45 in the morning, and then now it's 2:15. That means that it's 15 minutes within the window of circadian low, so that reduces it with 15 minutes. Like, this is why stay in school, people. Stay in school. That's all I can say. But anyway, so you had to use, what is captain's discretion?
Yeah. So if we do, we have this. Well, as the name says, we have this discretion as a captain. As long as we consult the crew and everyone's in agreement, we can exceed the maximum duty period by up to 2 hours in order to get us home. So it's designed for unforeseen circumstances. You're down route somewhere. You know that when you return, by the time you land back at your hub, you're going to have flown for more than 12 hours. But to get you home, to cover this unforeseen circumstance, there's a legal ability to extend your duty by up to 2 hours, which is called captain's discretion. And it's very objective. We'll speak to all of the crew. Everybody has to be in agreement. I'll have to speak to the cabin crew, the FO, and we'll look at things such as, has anyone else been into discretion this week? Has anyone had a minimum rest before this duty? Was anyone called off standby before this duty started? There's all of this.
That's when it can start to become really interesting, because even though you've been chilling on standby, if you've been on standby for more than a specific amount of hours, well, then part of that will be counted into your duty time.
Yep.
So again, complicated.
Yeah, it is. You've got to be super careful. You've got to really sit down with everybody and just go through this to make sure that absolutely this will be legal if we do this. And ultimately, are we feeling fit to fly this?
Because what happens if a cabin crew then says, actually, I feel a bit tired?
Well, yeah. If they're feeling a bit tired, there's thankfully a very objective flow chart that we use where we're kind of go through a number of questions. Is anyone on a 6th day of their week? Was anyone on minimum rest? Anyone called off standby? Blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, if the answer to all of those questions is no, on paper at least, we should be fit to go into captain's discretion. However, if there are circumstances that go beyond that, maybe there's something going on with this cabin crew that maybe they didn't sleep last night because something happened or whatever, and they're not fit to fly, and they say, look, I am not going to be fit to operate that flight, then there's 2 options. One would be, if we're in a base, we could replace that cabin crew and to fly home, excuse me, or we just won't fly. Yep. That flight will end up being cancelled.
Yeah, because I think it's really important for people to understand, as listening to this, that we have these duty time limitations for a reason, right? There has been a lot of surveys, a lot of research going into how much can a person operate, for how long can a person operate before fatigue starts to creep in? And the problem, of course, with fatigue is that it's insidious. You won't really feel like you'll have an idea. Every one of us has felt tired. Those who are listening, like, well, of course you're going to feel tired. The problem is that you can feel tired or you can feel a little bit sleepy early in the morning, even though you've had a perfect day night of sleeping. So you get up early in the morning, you're just going to feel sleepy, but you're not fatigued. Okay. Fatigue is more like something that creeps in when you've been operating for a long time, and you don't really notice it. That's part of the issue with it. So in our industry, we've learned that when you reach a certain moment, it's just time to stop. It's just time to stop it. And I've been in contact with a lot of people in the healthcare industry, like surgeons that can go on for 20-hour operations and stuff. And to me, that's just insanity. I cannot understand how we know about flight time limitations and duty time limitations, but people that are cutting into other people seemingly does not have any of those like cut limits. They have guidelines, but they don't have limits. Like, you're not allowed to continue after this point. But we are. And the thing is, we are risking our licenses if we bust that.
For
So
sure.
if we go above, you have this set limit of like flight time limitation. There's a difference between duty time limitation and flight time limitation. We're not going to go into that because it's another jungle. But if you bust it, obviously you have to report. We keep track of when we log off, when we start our duty and when we finish our duty, all of that is logged. And if you go through and you bust it, you are in risk of losing your license.
Oh, yeah. Something you'd never do.
No.
Never do.
And that's good, because it means that basically the decision is taken for us, right? We'll see, no, this is going to bring us beyond the maximum duty time. We will not do it. We will stay on the ground. And it's going to come with a lot of nuisance for the passengers, of course, and further delays and whatever. But that's just the way it is.
It's the lesser of the two evils. There's been plenty of research and kind of experiments and tests that have gone in to show that being fatigued has the same effect of being drunk.
Yep.
When you're really tired, people act in very strange ways, and you don't want people flying airplanes that are effectively drunk due to lack of sleep.
Exactly. And we are following this rigorously.
Yeah.
But this captain's discretion, it gives a little bit of leeway, basically, but as you can see, it's only allowing that leeway once there has been some kind of scientific check that actually this has been a good day. It's been three sectors without any big problems. We got an ATC slot because the French started striking. And now that pushed us into, we've been sitting in the aircraft drinking coffee, but we're not really tired, right? In that case, we go through that checklist, and the checklist allows us to extend it for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
But if this has been like, I've done situations where we've had continuous weather delays and technical problems and issues, loads of turbulence, and the crew is like, you can see it on them that this is not the day to use discretion. And in that case, you're going to end up with that form saying, no, it's not suitable. We are going to be staying behind.
And that's the beauty of it. It's very objective in that sense, but the company are very supportive if a crew said we're actually not fit to fly today, but use that discretion, because it is discretion. It's not something that's expected. It's something that we have the discretion to use, and we used it. We spoke to everybody. It was a relatively straightforward day, just a long day, and we used it to get home. And we only used about, I think, 15-20 minutes of it in the end.
Yeah.
So it was a 12-hour, 15-minute duty. So it enabled us to get home, and which is exactly what it was designed to do.
Exactly. And then you have to fill in the discretion form, which will go to the authorities. So the authorities keep track of how often this is being used, so it's not being abused.
Yeah.
So there's like, again, when you get into the weeds of aviation, you'll notice that there's a lot of regulation in there. This is not something like, this is just everyone just no. I think there are actual rules that if a certain block combination or route combination is using captain's discretion on more than a certain percentage, it has to be changed.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say, because one of the things the company does when you file that captain's discretion report is it will go into a database and they'll look, and has this pairing of destinations generated this more times than whatever it was that month, generated a discretion report. If it has, they'll look at it and then they'll change that pairing. because they'll see that when you put that airport with that airport, there's going to be delays. The crew will go into discretion. They change that pairing of destinations.
Yeah, no, it's a very robust system, and again, when it comes to fatigue, this is one of those things that I think I mentioned it in the last podcast as well. Is that there's a lot of emphasis on us as crew here. Obviously, the flight time limitations are there to make sure that the airlines are not, rostering crazy days to fly all the time. There's restrictions on how many flight hours you can do in a month, how many you can do in a calendar year, how many days, how many you can do on a single day. But ultimately, this is made so that there is sufficient rest between the duties, and then it's up to us to actually rest when that rest comes. So I know that there are a lot of pilots listening to the podcast, which makes me really, really happy. But if you are one of them, remember that when there's rest in between your flight duties and you see a long 5-day week coming up with like 4 sector days every single day, you have to really make sure that you're not being bothered. If you're a family man and you have small kids, maybe you need to talk to your wife and make sure that that you get your sleep in, basically, because that hangs on our responsibility to do.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, isn't it? Particularly when you have a young family. I look back when my kids were young, to make sure you get the required amount of sleep. I remember sleeping in spare rooms, in things like that, just to make sure that I've got my sleep. So, which you're kind of torn. You want your sleep because you want to sleep, but B, you've got to have some sleep, but you also feel guilty. your wife.
Absolutely, but this is part of this world, unfortunately. Like it's one of those things that we just cannot get away from. People are expecting us to be well rested when we sit down in the cockpits, and no one is going to take any excuse for that.
Nope.
So if you get into a situation where you just cannot sleep, well, then it's probably like you're probably not going to have to go down on like part-time or something to make sure that you can deal with that.
Yeah, there was times years ago when the kids were very young where I actually had to call in sick because the kids were ill, my wife was ill, they were up in the night, and I just hadn't slept. So there's no way I could go to work that day. So yeah, I had to call in. Company, they were fine with it. Yeah.
That's just the way it is. But it's an interesting. This will probably generate a lot of questions. So again, if you have questions about anything that we say or anything that you think that we should be saying more about, then put it in as a comment here on the video if you're watching this on YouTube, or go to, was it Captains plural, captains@mentorpilot.com. So that's the email address. So send your questions in there, and we will either use them to create a new episode, or we will answer them directly here. So, but that sounds like a hard week anyway.
It's been good. It's been good. Yeah. How about you though?
I've had one of those weeks. It's interesting because as a content provider and a content creator, you have very different problems from when you're a pilot. So, pilot, you know all of the things that you've been talking about: delays, technical issues with duty times, all of that. It's very like there are very clear solutions to them. You either go or you don't, or you fix the delay in whatever way is possible. But as a content creator, you come across these things that you can't really understand, and there's no clear answer to how to fix them. So, for example, Mentor Now, my second channel. Mentor Pilot is the documentary channel, and Mentor Now is the one that talks about current events and what's going on in the aviation world. It's been doing really well. A lot of good reception, especially during the summer when the terrible Air India accident happened. We did a lot of live streams and stuff on it. But in the autumn, it started to slow down. And now we've had a couple of videos, which just does not seem to resonate really with the audience. And it's up to me to figure out how I can provide the maximum value to the people that are watching, right? It's all about that. It's all about the audience feeling that they're getting something. And as a content creator, I need to figure out what that is. And sometimes you don't get it right, okay? So you do this video, like I did a video about autopilots and how to use the autopilot, which we're going to be talking about today, and how the autopilot has become this incredible thing, but it also comes with real problems, right? Put that video out, and it just didn't resonate. People are not clicking on it. They're not watching it. So I then have to sit down and figure out, what do I do about this? And the algorithm, the way that works is that if you have a video that's underperforming, it's not going to be showing the next video as much to the subscribers because they think maybe they want to watch something else. So you get into this negative spiral, which like one video does bad, and then another one does worse, and then another one, and that is from a mental health point of view, is not fantastic. Like
No,
you end up sitting thinking about these things that you cannot possibly control.
no.
At the end of the day, it's about me talking about stuff that I assume that people will think is interesting, and if they don't, then I'm out of luck, unfortunately. So it's been like that. Unfortunately, a week ago we had a meetup. The whole crew met up in Barcelona, except you, Ben, who were flying,
Yeah.
and we were sitting down and we were discussing these things, like how do we get the maximum value out to the viewers, and what should we be doing? Should we add some new segments? Should we come up with some new stuff to do? That's how we come up with things like this podcast, for example. By the way, this is also where I'm so grateful that I have my Patreons behind me, because the Patreons are the buffer when things are going badly on YouTube and YouTube is not paying out as much. Well, then I have my Patreons there, so I can pay the paychecks of the team. So I'm super grateful about that. But one thing that was really interesting was that we obviously in our team we have people coming from all over the world, including from the United States. And this brings us into the sponsor that we have for this episode. And I want you to listen now. I don't want you to click away, okay? Because this sponsor is actually really good, especially if you end up being, like us, someone who is traveling a lot and is switching between countries and even continents often. And it's Holafly. Have you been using any eSIMs, Ben?
Yeah, it was a game changer for me, 'cause when I came out to visit you, actually, because you're in Andorra. Andorra is not part of the EU. I had to fly from the UK to Barcelona, from Barcelona driving into Andorra, and having like a single eSIM that just seamlessly switches between different countries, whether you're in the EU, outside of the EU, roaming anywhere, it just works.
Holafly is truly the first global mobile provider, because now they have started something that I've never seen before, and that is they have basically two different data plans. Either you can use the light plan, which is up to 25 gigabytes, or you can use the unlimited plan, which I think most people will do. And that's limitless data in these 160 countries, no matter where you are in the world, and you can just switch this on, activate it, and that's it. You can still use your own phone number, and you can use Holafly for data. This is something that is truly helpful if you're a digital nomad, or you're a pilot or a cabin crew, or someone who's just traveling a lot in work. This is the thing to go for. If you go to esim.holafly.com and you sign up there and you use the discount code MENTOR, then you'll get 10% discount if you go with a monthly sign-up plan. Or if you go with the annual, you'll get first 22% discount because you're going annual, and then a further 10% if you're using our code. So check out the QR code if you're watching this on YouTube, or go to esim.holafly.com and use the discount code MENTOR. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, there's been, as in the UK and Europe, there's been a lot of, we spoke about it last week, there's been a lot of storms, there's been a lot of weather, there's been a lot of diversions going on. And we covered a lot of that in the previous episode. We got some great kind of feedback and comments on that. But one thing we just touched on last week was the fact that crews were having to go around because of wind shear. And we're coming to that time of year now when this is becoming more frequent. So I thought it'd be good to dissect this a little bit and go into what exactly wind shear is. How do we recognize it? How do we know when we're in it? How do we escape it? And then how do we kind of recover back once we have? So I thought we could go dive into that and also share some personal experiences of, I'm sure you've had it, I've had it, and how we managed it in that particular event.
Yeah, so wind shear is one of those things that if you follow mainstream media and someone writes about it, this is the things that really scare people, right? Because it can feel like a very scary maneuver. It almost feels out of control maneuver because of the nature of being in a wind shear. It's going to be very turbulent, and you're going to have a lot of thrust changes from the aircraft. So it will scare someone who's not aware about what's happening if you're ever in a wind shear escape maneuver, but it's actually a very controlled maneuver that follows very specific steps. So you're saying that we're coming into the season. Why are you saying that?
Well, coming into autumn in the Northern Hemisphere here, with the winds, we're getting these storms that are starting to move across the Atlantic. They're coming into the UK, coming into Northern Europe, and the winds are generally getting stronger when these come through. We're in a nice high pressure at the moment. Actually, coming back last night from Spain, it was lovely. But these after this, no doubt there will be a low pressure system.
Yeah.
And with that, you get the wind.
Cool. And the thing with wind is, right, if we go down to the real kind of basic level here, is that an aircraft flies in relation to the surrounding air. So an aircraft does not care about how quickly it's moving in relation to the ground below it. It's just about how it's moving through the air, because we need the air to flow over our wings to create the lift that we need in order to fly safely. And the wind, obviously, is the air moving in slightly, well, either a very steady direction, in which case it doesn't really matter that much. It will affect us during takeoff and landing in the form of better performance, takeoff performance if we have a lot of headwind. Crosswind can cause us to have to maneuver a little bit more. But the problem really comes when it's not steady. Right, when you have sudden gusts of winds that changes the speed of the airspeed of the aircraft, and then that dies out, and that airspeed is then gone, or the other way around.
Yeah. And that's the sheer part of wind shear. It's the sudden change of direction or speed or both that is what causes a problem. Because as Peder said, all the aircraft cares about is the wind, if you like, flowing over the wings. And the angle at which that happens.
You know, when we're on that, because this is great, every single year I go out on Facebook or on Instagram, and there's always this same question. You put a 747 on a conveyor belt, and you know it's moving. The aircraft is accelerating on the conveyor belt to its rotation speed. The conveyor belt is doing the exact same speed but opposite. Will the aircraft fly? Can we get one answer to that?
This is, you see this, when you look at the comments, it's so polarized, aren't they, one way or the other?
Yes, but can we get an answer?
Well, yeah, if the aircraft is accelerating, because remember the aircraft, unlike a car, go on, Peder, you want to jump in?
No. I'm just gonna. I'm just hoping that you're gonna come to the same conclusion that I always give
This
them.
will be interesting. Yeah. Me, okay, I'll give you my point. Okay, so for me, you've got a 747. They spool up to takeoff power.
Yeah.
It's not unlike a car where the wheels drive the car. The wheels are there just to support the aircraft. So if the aircraft is getting pulled through the air by its engines, now which means it will start going through the air. If the conveyor belt starts to match that, then all that's going to happen is that conveyor belt's going to have to get faster and faster, because the aircraft is moving through the air, and the conveyor belt will have to match the speed of the wheels. And it'll get to a point where the airflow will reach the correct speed, and it will take off.
But it will never reach. Like the way that this is written is basically showing that the aircraft will not move anywhere.
But this is where the confusion or the disagreements come in, because if, let's say, you've got an aircraft that's sitting on that conveyor belt, you've got, let's say, in the 737, you've got best part of 60,000 pounds of thrust pulling that aircraft through the air. That conveyor belt, unless the wheels lock, will not stop that aircraft moving.
No. But I think I agree with you. Let's just get to this. If the aircraft is staying stationary, it will not take off.
No.
It's easy as that. And I think that is what they're trying. They're trying to say, basically, that the aircraft is going to stay stationary. Now, what is actually going to happen, you're absolutely right, is that it doesn't really matter, because it's not the wheels that is moving this. It's going to just go away anyway. And as soon as it accelerates up to its speed away from the conveyor belt, it will go. But the real logic here is that if the aircraft is standing still, if that's what the premise is of this question, no, it will not take off, because it will need that air to flow over the wings. That is the primary and only thing that counts here. It doesn't matter how quickly. Well, eventually those wheels will break, because there's something called the maximum wheel rotation speed, which a lot of people don't understand. But if the aircraft moves, it will eventually take off. If it doesn't move, it will not.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, because then you get into that whole, what will the conveyor belt actually do? But I think this is it's just that people need to understand that part. So that then brings us into what happens if you are flying along on your approach, for example. We normally tend to be fully configured with maybe flaps 30 or 40 at 145 knots. That's about 250 kilometers per hour, something like that. Sitting there, everything is done. You're fully configured. You've done your landing checklist. And all of a sudden, the wind that was 20 knots coming straight towards you dies down to zero. What will happen to your indicated airspeed then?
Well, from our perspective, sitting in the flight deck, we're looking at our instruments. When that wind suddenly drops by 20 knots, our airspeed will drop by 20 knots. So you're going to see a very sudden reduction in your airspeed.
And that is bad. Why?
It's bad for us. Why? Because the lift being produced by those wings, or one of the elements of that, is dependent on the airspeed flying over them. So when we reduce that airspeed by 20 knots, now we're reducing the amount of lift, which means we need to increase the angle of attack, which is the angle that the wind hits the wing, which means we're getting closer to the stalling angle of attack. We lose some of the maneuverability in the aircraft, all of which is not good.
No. Now let's say that you're in the same situation and you are in zero wind, and all of a sudden you get a gust of 20 knots from the front. So now you're getting 20 knots extra. Why is that not good?
That's not good now because it can destabilize the aircraft, because the aircraft will now accelerate by 20 knots, and the flaps that we use for landing have a maximum airspeed at which they can be used in. So if we were, say, flap 40 and we are flying at 145 knots, we suddenly get a gust of headwind for 20 knots. Our airspeed will increase to 165 knots, which exceeds the flap speed for a 737-800 for flap 40, which means the flaps now will do something called a blowback. Once it senses that, to prevent damage, they will automatically retract to flap 30 until the speed reduces by about 5 knots below the placard. But once that happens, we've now got to go around because the aircraft is not what we call stable. It's not fully configured in the landing configuration.
Correct. So both of these things, to loads, a sudden gust of positive, which is a positive wind shear, or a negative wind shear where the speed disappears, is not good.
Nope.
Right? And not something that you want to be dealing with as you're getting ready to land the aircraft. So what is the definition of a wind shear for us?
So we've got loads of different parameters. So we're looking at obviously airspeed, fluctuations in airspeed. We're looking at like 20 knots. We're looking at rates of descent changes of uncommanded of say 500 feet per minute. We're looking at, if we're on an ILS, which is the instrument landing system, it tells us whether we're high or low on the correct approach path. If that deviates by more than one dot on our scale unintentionally, that could be classed as a wind shear event. But a really interesting one that I like is, and that I really kind of bring into the training, is an unusual thrust lever position for a prolonged period of time. Yeah. I think that's a great one because
that one is not it's not the obvious one.
No, it's not. No, it's not, because normally the aircraft will shout, and we'll come into this in a minute. It will tell you when we are in wind shear. It will very, very kind of objectively shout that we're in wind shear. But a kind of very good precursor to that, and using kind of your situation awareness, is if you're coming down the approach, we know this normal pitch and power settings for our aircraft. So, for example, if we're coming in at flap 30, we're normally about 1 degree nose up on our horizon, and we're about 55 to 57% thrust set. Great, that's pretty normal. Now, if we're coming in and let's say there's a thunderstorm cloud nearby and there's these downdrafts, and we get a big tailwind, for example, because of this, we're going to suddenly see that airspeed reduce. So naturally, what we're going to do to correct for that is now add thrust. So our thrust might go from 55, 57% to maybe 65, 70%. And normally you might only have to do that for a few seconds just to regain the energy in the aircraft. But with a sustained tailwind like that, you're going to have to keep that thrust there for a prolonged period of time. And that's going to look strange. And what that is a precursor that in a minute, that tailwind's probably going to turn into a headwind, and the speed's going to go whoosh the other way. So when we notice that thrust is either too high or too low for a prolonged period of time, that's an early warning that actually we could be entering a wind shear environment here.
So those are some of the criteria that we use when we don't have the aircraft screaming at us, right? So is it 15 knots? 15 knots.
15 knots, yeah.
And all of the other things that you mentioned, and so we look at all of these, and together it will form a picture, right? This does not look good, but then you have the actual wind shear warning, which is divided into two different things, isn't it? So we have the predictive wind shear warning. which is based on the weather radar. The weather radar will be constantly scanning, and normally it needs precipitation, as in rain, snow,
it will do.
water content.
Yeah.
And it will then look and it will see that, oh, there's a couple of water droplets over there that's falling straight down, and then all of a sudden they go the other way, right? So all right, that movement of air over there, that pocket, probably contains a wind shear. And in that case, it will give us a predictive wind shear warning, which is kind of like monitor radar display.
Wind
Go
shear
around, wind shear ahead, wind shear ahead, or wind shear. Not wind shear, but the one we get on the landing. Oh, sorry, on takeoff. It's predictive wind shear on
wind
takeoff.
shear ahead.
Wind shear ahead.
Yeah,
correct, exactly. So that's the predictive one, right? And if we get that one far out on the approach, we can decide to just go around, to avoid it. We normally get a nice depiction on the radar display showing where it is, so we can choose to just do a go around and avoid it. But then you have the second one, which is based on the GPWS system, the ground proximity warning system.
Yes. So this one now is taking, rather than predicting it from what it's seeing in the future, this is taking the actual aircraft inputs, so rates of descent, ground closure rates, thrust, speed, and so on, and it will recognize when we're actually in a wind shear. So this is now reactive wind shear. And when we get that one, it's going to really alert us. We get a 2-tone alert. And that's it. How's it go?
Wind shear.
There you go. You can see Petter makes videos. So that's how it will sound. And that's at that point there, it's a no-brainer. We are obligated now to go into our wind shear escape maneuver.
Yeah.
And that basically puts the aircraft from an approach, if we're in an approach, into a configuration that gives us the maximum energy to climb away from the ground. Because the danger of a wind shear, of course, is that we get pushed into the ground. That's the worst case scenario, which has caused incidents in the past. So what we need to do is make sure that we just now climb away and get away from that ground as quickly and safely as we can.
Cool. So you hear wind shear, wind shear, wind shear. Your pilot's flying.
So what we're going to do, so without so we're just going to go to wind shear. We're going to press what we call the toga buttons, which are the takeoff and go around buttons. I'll come back to why we press that in a moment. We're then going to aggressively apply maximum thrust. So we just firewall the thrust levers as far forward as they go, to get us as much power out of those engines as possible. And then we disconnect the autothrottle, because we don't want the autothrottle automatically bringing thrust back to go around thrust. We want the full beans. Once we've done that, we've disconnected the autothrottle, we're kind of simultaneously rolling the wings level, and we're pitching up initially to 15 degrees, and we're stowing the speed brake. It shouldn't be out, but we just make sure that that's stowed so there's no extra drag on the aircraft. And then the reason we press toga is that the logic in what we call the flight director system, which is a system that guides the pilots in pitch and roll on our instruments, it's got a very basic logic. If a pilot presses toga, it will give us go around guidance. If it has a wind shear warning and then we press toga, it will give us wind shear guidance. So now what we aim to do is to follow the pitch bar of that, which will pitch us to give us our maximum angle of climb away from the ground, our max coefficient of lift, we call it, getting those wings working as hard as possible. And that's what we're aiming to do. So it's going to pitch us potentially quite high to get us climbing away from the ground. And now at that point, it's done its job initially.
And then I am pilot monitoring. So I hear the wind shear warning. I'm not going to repeat it. I see you executing these actions. Then what I also do is make sure that there's no changes in configuration. So we don't retract our gear, we don't retract our flaps, at least not initially. And that's because of the same reason, if this wind shear is upon us and it's pushing us down against the ground, we actually will need the gear potentially to take up some of the impact forces. But also the flaps, if we would start to retract them at this point and we get a negative wind shear, the aircraft might actually stall. So we leave the configuration with the exception of the speed brake. The rest we just leave. So now we're just climbing away in the configuration we had. And then I am monitoring that all of these actions that we know, this is taken from our memory, that all of those actions have been correctly executed. So if Ben now misses something, I will come in and help him put the speed brake down, or I will hold the thrust levers forward if the outer throttle start to remove them because the wind is changing the speed. So the pilot monitoring is doing this while also calling out any tendencies towards terrain and any changes in the situation. Because at the moment we have a big red wind shear in front of us, which is telling us that we are still in the wind shear. At some point, we are hopefully going to get out of this wind shear because it tends to be a pretty localized phenomenon. So that's going to be up to me then to be able to call, okay, you're climbing, the speed is increasing, the speed is decreasing, you're descending. Okay, you're climbing again now. You have a positive trend on the speed. All right, the wind shear, the red wind shear is gone. I'm going to say, okay, it looks like we're out of the wind shear.
Yeah.
What will you do?
Good. And this is where it can be quite challenging when we train this. This is where things get a bit messy, as I'm sure you've seen in the sim, where
many times, yes.
Because the crew will do a beautifully flown wind shear escape maneuver, but it's that transition from going up like a homesick angel to now leveling off and getting back into a normal phase of flight. So that clear of wind shear call is super important because it differentiates and ends that wind shear escape and marks the beginning of our recovery to normal flight. When a crew doesn't really get that out, you're in this gray area of, are we in it, are we not? And you end up busting flat placard speeds and it gets a bit messy. So once Peder says to me, yeah, clear of wind shear, we're now going to get the aircraft back into a normal phase of flight. And the best way of doing that is to keep it as standard as we can. And that's to go into a go around. So what we'll typically do is initially we'll lower the nose because the nose could be super high here. So we could get the nose down to a more normal pitch attitude of say 15 degrees. And the speed is normally, the speed is normally rocketing up. So now we're going to have to start reducing that thrust fairly significantly because we'll start accelerating beyond the maximum speed for our flaps. So we're going to simultaneously do that. And then once we're happy that that's done, we're going to press toga call go around, flap 15, set go around thrust, positive rate. We get the gear up now and we can get roll modes in for the autopilot and then we'll start retracting flaps and get us back into that normal phase of flight.
I just want to emphasize here that step to mentally go back down to where you start to go around and just kind of get yourself back into, all right, I'm going to start to go around now. Go around, flaps 15, set go around thrust, positive rate, gear up, 400 feet, LNAV, flaps 5. What I'm saying now is a normal go around sequence, right? And by doing that, by mentally transporting yourself back and just going through step by step, it means that you will not miss anything. Because remember, the gear is still out, the flaps is still hanging out. You don't have a roll mode. You don't have roll mode is what's guiding us laterally when we're flying normally and helping our flight directors to show what we're supposed to do. So if you just go back and you go through this step by step, you're going to get back to something that you're relatively used to, and you are not going to miss any step, and you're going to bring the aircraft back into a normal situation again where you eventually can get the autopilot in and tell air traffic control what's happening.
Yeah.
So,
And typically we're doing this because we're still bumping around. It's still going to be super bumpy probably. We're bumping around doing this. It's nighttime. The window wipers might be going. You're in and out of cloud. There's a lot going on. So what I'll also teach crews to do is once they've done what they think they need to do, is I get them just to run through those calls that Peder said in their mind. And it'll often catch things that might have been forgotten. So once everything's under control, the workload is down in your mind. Okay, go around flap 15. Yep, that's set. Go around thrust. Yep. Positive rate, gear up. The gear.
Exactly. Why is it so noisy? But by the way, if you're a passenger, this is what I was referring to in the beginning. This will feel terrifying because you will go from what's likely going to be a really bumpy approach, because normally these wind shears occur around storm clouds or in really windy conditions, like when there's a storm outside. So you would be not ready if you're a nervous flyer sitting in a pretty bumpy ride going down, and all of a sudden what you'll feel is the aircraft suddenly pitching up and the engine screaming at the same time. And that is, as we just showed, a perfectly normal maneuver, right? It's built to be extreme, and that's just to cover all potential scenarios. In 99.5% of the cases, the wind shear is not that bad, right? It will never be close to pushing you down in the ground, but we don't take any chances. We do the same maneuver for every single wind shear that we have in order to make sure that we, again, keep us as safe as absolutely possible.
Yeah. And it, like you said, we're normally out of it pretty quickly. I think I actually had a fairly lucky escape from a wind shear recently. The last name storm I flew in, we were coming in very, very windy, blowing, and it was gusting 40, 50 knots. And we're coming into the UK and we had loads of fuel on board. We knew this weather was going to be an issue, alternates all over the place potentially. We're coming down the approach. We're number 3 of 4 on the approach. 2 aircraft ahead, 1 behind. First one on the approach, going around due wind shear. We'd obviously briefed the wind shear. We're ready for it. Second one ahead of us, in the flare, you can see them in front of you. They go around wind shear. So we're fully ready for this. Anyway, 50, 40, 30 over the runway, 20, 10, kicking it straight with the rudder because of the crosswind, and touchdown. I get the reverses out, and just as I get the reverses out, it goes doo-doo, wind shear, wind
Yeah.
shear.
I've had the exact same thing. It
Oh,
shouldn't
really?
happen. It shouldn't. Like
It shouldn't happen.
it shouldn't happen. Like it must have been. I think that it actually the track probably started playing before the touchdown. As in, like the logic has started, but you are touched down now when it's actually been played.
Well, funny enough, because we've got an app where you can actually go and review your landings now, which is really cool. It's like seeing like the cockpit voice, the flight data, recorded data visually. It's a great training tool because you can show cadets on their landing what they did, their inputs. And I said this shouldn't have happened. You know, when we got on stand, did this happen early and we just were too late to act it? But we looked and we landed. You can see we're weight on wheels. You see the reverses, and then you see the wind shear come up on this app. So it's bizarre.
Just to explain to everyone out there, the reason this shouldn't happen is that you shouldn't get a go around, like a wind shear warning like that once you're down on the ground.
No, once the aircraft's weight on wheels, it senses you're on the ground, that predictive wind shear should stop. But like Petter said, maybe internally it triggered it just as we touched down or just before the weight on wheels switch was made, and then gave it after I don't know. But we're down, so we're done. Have you had an actual wind shear in flight? I'm sure you've had a.
So I'm trying to remember. I don't think that I actually have. I
Okay.
think I got one of those where we came into Stockholm Skavsta once, where we also touched down and got it after landing. But I haven't gotten have had to do an actual wind shear escape maneuver.
Okay.
It's been close,
Yeah.
especially without the wind shear warning, but with those criteria that we were talking about before. But I've actually not had to do it. I did get a predictive one that I talked about last time that we interestingly ignored. But but you'll have to watch, or you have to listen to the last episode in order to get that.
Yeah.
But this is pretty rare.
It is rare.
And also, by the way, I just want to say that if you're listening to this now and you think, damn, these guys are explaining these procedures good, which I really hope that you think, by the way, both me and Ben, we put together a virtual 737 course. So if you go to virtual737course.com, you can actually get that course, and it's made specifically for people who have their home flight simulators and want to fly as accurately as possible. But it's also available for people who are just interested in knowing these kind of things, like why do pilots do what they do, how do they do it, in what sequence, and why. So we're really proud of that course, and if you are interested in checking it out, you're going to get what you just heard.
Yeah.
This is what we do, but with the additive of us actually showing in the simulator how we do it as well on the flight sim. So whatever buttons we push and why. So check it out.
Definitely worth it. Full setups, briefings, checklists. It's all there. It's a great resource.
Yeah, whole flight, non-precision approaches.
It's all there. Yeah, good. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think I've only had a couple of wind shears in my time, but like you said, they were never as bad as they are in the sim. We always make it bad in the sim, don't we?
Yeah. No, in the sim, and it is just like you pointed out. It's really interesting because people will do the wind shear escape maneuver flawlessly, but the wind shear escape maneuver obviously is only the beginning. It's what you do to get out of it, to recover from the wind shear, that really will set you apart. So you have to have those things right. Out of wind shear, pitch down, reduce thrust, and it's a large movement of the thrust lever. From when it's firewalled until you get back to like normal go-around thrust, it feels like you're moving it almost all the way back. But you pull it back to somewhere like mid, slightly beyond mid position, and then once there, okay, go around, flap 15, set go around thrust, and you start going all over it again. And then you talk to air traffic control, you tell them, because they're going to be warning people that's coming in behind you. And then you're going to have to go into what we normally talk about, the structured decision-making model, PIOSI.
Yeah.
Is it worth going in and trying another one, or do we divert now? There's going to be a lot of discussions once the adrenaline has started to reside.
That's exactly. We have to compartmentalize things when we fly, don't we? We've got to not allow what's just happened to affect what's about to happen. We've got to manage that. There inevitably will be some adrenaline and some of that running through you when you've had that. So we've got to just check on everybody, the person next to you, cabin crew, passengers, calm everything down, make a plan.
Exactly, and talk to the passengers. Remember to make a PA. Because after something like this, there are going to be a large percentage, like third of the people on the back are going to be distressed. So they need to hear a calm voice. And so remember that as well. When you do a PA in a situation like this, you should come in sounding like this was a walk in the park that you do every day. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a captain speaking. As you've noticed, we had to discontinue that approach. We are now looking at the weather for going in to do a second approach in, or we have decided that we are going to divert to our alternate. I'm going to keep you updated about your ongoing travel plans once we get down on the ground. But for now, listen to your cabin crew and, something that just reinforces your cabin crew and gives calm to the passengers, basically.
They want to make you want to make people feel that you're fully in control of what's going on, not that you're panicking and trying to plan what's going on. Yeah.
Should we take a question from the audience before we go?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to try something try to find someone that is not super long, because you've been great in sending in really long ones, and they work perfectly to actually set up a whole new episode. But let's see. Hi, captains. I have questions for Captain Speaking episode. What was the most absurd incident or something surprising that happened in the cockpit or airplane in general? This actually also raises two questions. What was the most absurd thing a passenger did that you have ever heard about? What was the most absurd thing the crew ever did that you ever heard about? Oh,
okay.
This is actually a whole episode in itself, isn't it?
I can think of one springs to mind that's quite funny it's not funny, it's horrendous from a passenger's perspective. But very briefly, we're going down to Ibiza, which is obviously a stag do heaven where everyone goes down. These 20-year-old men, big groups of them going down, they're getting drunk, notoriously raucous flights. And we're going down to Ibiza. There's one of these stag do's on board, and everyone's obviously been drinking beforehand. Anyway, one of them in the flight gets sick from drinking too much, so he thankfully pukes in a sick bag, fair enough. But then his mates deem it sensible and funny to then play catch with this sick bag.
Oh no! The other passengers.
They grab this sick bag and they throw it to their mate, like, I don't know, 4 rows back, and then you can imagine it's just like peas and carrots, like just everywhere. So the poor cabin crew, they call me, look, this is what's happened, and we need cleaners, we need to sterilize this plane. And so passengers do weird things.
Yeah, no, I had not on my flight, but a mate's flight, where some dude was also a little bit, had drunk a little bit too much alcohol, and wanted to get up and pee when the fasten belt was on, and it was before landing, so it wasn't like an optional one. It was just you have to sit down because we're going to be landing soon. And this person, he decided, no, I'm not going to listen to that. And he got so aggravated that he actually got up and he peed all over the first 3 rows. He just stood up and peed. This stuff that happens to people in stressful situations when they drink alcohol that you just would not ever understand or be able to explain. But I have, obviously from flying for over 20 years, there's loads of stories. So we'll probably do a separate episode about that.
We'll come back.
Absolutely. There are some really interesting stuff here about whether a passenger could actually land a plane. I've done a video on that, so check it out. But we will get back to those as well. So for now, this was a great episode. I really enjoyed this one.
It was good. I enjoyed it. Yeah, and I think we could maybe even do one live Q&A session on it. We get so many amazing questions.
I think so.
Actually do a whole session on questions.
Yeah. So captains@mentorpilot.com is the email, or put it into the comment section here. Remember to check out Holafly, our sponsor. We're really, really grateful for them for sponsoring this episode because it helps us continue, even though this is a really niche podcast with not that many viewers, but we'd love to continue. And you can help us doing that by supporting our sponsor. So there should be a QR code here on the screen. You can check it out. And if you're traveling somewhere and you need an eSIM, definitely check them out.
Yeah. And we got some great guests coming on this soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that too.
That's true. We have some really good guests lined up. So on that bombshell, man, thanks a lot for being here. And I hope that I see all of you who are watching, listening to this program in our next podcast as well. So until then, bye-bye.
See you then.